Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink program. I'm your host, Keshia. Coming up, we island hop in the Caribbean with the author of a new cookbook.
It was one of the only things I really enjoyed as I got older, and I just think I just deep dived, want to learn more. Plus, I enjoy culture and travel and people and understanding all them things. So it was just like a crossover of both, really.
Also on the program, we sample Syria's best shawarma. Plus, we get the full A to Z of Chinese food with Jenny Lau. All that here on The Menu on Monocle Radio. Caribbean cuisine is frequently used as a catch-all term for the food that comes from across the archipelago, but of course, each island has its own traditions and unique dishes. Although there definitely is a red thread that links all these cuisines together, author Keshia Sakarah was determined to celebrate the specificity of each country's food customs. That's why she set out on an ambitious project to trace not only their recipes, but also the legacy of their gastronomic culture. The resulting book, Caribe, a Caribbean cookbook with history, touches on 23 different nations, and it is as exhaustive as it is personal, even more so because she took many of the travel photographs in it herself. Earlier, Keshia joined me in the studio to tell me more about the many trips and extensive research that went into this project. I started by asking her why she took such an encyclopedic approach to the task.
Multiple reasons, actually. I think that I've grown up where food has been really critical to my identity. And I was born and raised in Leicester, first of all. So there's like a very small Caribbean community there. So food was really important for us to stay connected. Also, my grandparents are from very small islands in the Caribbean, Montserrat and Barbuda. So two separate islands on both sides. So again, there was like very minimal things that we could attach to like reminders of who we are, where we're from. So that's always been very present in who I am. And I think as I explored food and enjoyed cooking, I realised that I could learn so much more through my cooking. And then I realised that others could benefit from that as well. Not only that, I just found that there was so much conversation around the Caribbean that wasn't kind of touched on that I felt that others would benefit from. So as I was looking at recipes through my own just enjoyment, through my own food endeavours, I just knew that there was lots more to share here. So as I developed the concept, my agent was just like, you have to be bold about this and you have to go in with it. And that's why the subtitle is what it is, to be honest.
I think it's interesting, this idea of true specificity, because you go through island by island listing every single specific dish to that island. And I think it's such a common misconception to just label something as Caribbean when actually geographically we're talking about such a huge region. How much did the research process also illuminate your knowledge as well? How did you approach the task and what did it involve? Did you travel? Did you bury yourself in books for years?
So I think I say in the introduction, this is a research task as well as a lifetime's work. And why I say that is because I am two nations within my own identity, Montserrat and Barbuda. My cousins are Jamaican, I have friends that are from Trinidad. So I already experienced some of these differences and some of the details just through the foods that we eat, through the way that we, like our national dishes, for example, roti in Trinidad and ackee and saltfish in Jamaica, for example. So I already had an awareness that there's lots of detail here. And as you said, we don't describe other nations just by their general geographic surroundings, like European food, for example. So I think I was already experiencing the subcultures through just my life and my experiences and travel anyway. And then I think that encouraged me to visit more islands and see more and tap into the history and reading just so I could solidify what I was already experiencing. Because through that, I started to see that, different migrations, different events in history brought lots of different communities to the region through what happened in the past and the colonial period and so on.
There are so many layers of history and so many layers of migration to this history and to this story. I wonder how much your own diasporic identity also bears into this. How different the perspective of someone looking from the outside in is from someone looking from inside, and what kind of curiosity, what kind of sense of desire for connection also that feeds given that it's such a common narrative also?
I think it taps into the first thing that we said in terms of how food shapes our identity. And without realizing it, it's something that we attach to reminders where we're from. So I know that for my grandparents, going to the market was like crucial to them. Getting yam and sweet potato and plantain and things like that was essential to their survival, because everything else around them in England, which was cold and grey and dark and miserable and unfortunately quite hostile, was nothing like what they had left. So I think in that sense that it is just like it's another vessel to kind of stay attached to who you are. And I think there are so many communities that experience that throughout the world, because migration happens all the time on so many levels for different reasons. And I guess, unfortunately, colonialism has played a massive part in that and is kind of the foundation to a lot of this movement of people, whether by choice or by not. So when you are of a diaspora, you have to reach to certain things to, again, stay connected to who you are, remind yourself of where you're from, especially when the environment around you tells you that you're not from there because you're from somewhere else. Do you know what I mean?
Of course, there's so much of your own personal family history in this. You know, we kind of dive into the book directly through your grandma, basically. Can you tell us, please, I suppose your early memories of falling in love with food through them and then of your own devices? So growing up, like, food was just ever present. So whether it was, and it was both of my grandmothers, fortunately, I was very fortunate to grow up with both. So just because also by the time I was born, they had retired. So they kind of got the time to enjoy cooking in a different way. Because I know for my parents, the cooking for them was more out of necessity. Whereas by the time I was born, also the accessibility to ingredients, they got to cook in a more enjoyable way. But through them, I just saw how food was fun, it was joy, it brought people together, it was obviously enjoyable to eat, it was just also going to the allotment, going to the market. I got to see it from farm to fork essentially, but that's just a natural process of, you know, seeing how food, that like the full life cycle of food. So that planted those seeds in my early years. And I just think because I'm creative, it was one of the only things I really enjoyed as I got older. And I just think I just deep dived, want to learn more. Plus, I enjoy culture and travel and people and understanding all them things. So it was just like a crossover of both, really. You mentioned the allotment, and there's a really quite philosophical moment in your introduction where you mentioned this connection to the garden and to land in general, and the importance that seeing physically things grow from the actual soil has a particular relevance. Can you tell us more about that, and why do you think it holds this importance?
I think culturally, it has a very specific and special connection culturally. I think for anyone of the African diaspora, so the Caribbean is the African diaspora, because whether on the continent in Africa or then to be displaced in the Caribbean, we live in and amongst nature. You know, my grandparents have told me stories of, like, you know, being able to pick soursop off the tree or, you know, take yams out of the ground, for example. So there's a real connection to the land. There's a real respect for the earth. There's a real understanding of the seasons and just how nature evolves at different times and spaces and phases. So as a result of that, there's just a different feeling that ingredients will have for you because of the appreciation of its life and how it gets there and how long it takes to grow or how long it takes to mature, for example. And I was very fortunate to experience that secondhand with them. So having their allotment in England was almost like a microcosm of that. And they brought that, they held on to that. And I love that they did that because it was almost like a form of resistance as well. Because like I said, England was so much more hostile to the land that they had left.
There's a directory of some of these ingredients in the book. And a specific kind of focus on saltfish. But I wanted to ask you, which ingredients do you feel particularly connected to out of this plethora of this kind of basket of plentiful things?
I mean, you mentioned saltfish, and I think there's a focus on saltfish because that because that's like, I always remember that's the smell of it being boiled in the house. And what I found fascinating through later learning was just how long it had been in our culture and then how it became part of our culture. So as I've referenced in the book, just the fact that it was an import, it had a very specific purpose. It was there to feed the enslaved communities. But even though that's how it became a part of our culture, we still eat it till this day. And there's no shame or disdain for that, because I love salt fish. I grew up watching my grandma cook it. Both of my grandmothers cook it. And it's very much a part of all of the dishes that we celebrate today. So I think I love the fact that it's evolved its life, you could say, and taking on new meaning, irrelevant of its origins.
What about the recipes themselves in the book? Because there's a plethora of them and they look incredible. The photography in the book throughout is fantastic.
Thank you.
Can you guide us to some that hold particular relevance to you for one reason or another? And also, I suppose, how did you collect them practically? Where did you get the first-hand information from?
So in terms of specific ones to guide you to and the ones that kind of have personal meaning to me, I would say I love, for example, the flying fish and cuckoo. That one is the national dish of Barbados. The flying fish, because it's their national, it's like a fish that's like fully attached to the island. But cuckoo is cool because it's an ingredient and a cooking method that 100% evolved from Africa. The method of turning it, and even though we use ground corn in the islands, originally that would have been a different starch that would have been ground down. I just love the fact that it's evolved and taken on another life. How I collected all these recipes, these are just ones that I know, ones that I've enjoyed, ones that I saw or I know that are like national dishes, or that I just saw are part of the foodways across the region. And I just wanted to really highlight as many traditional ones as possible so that they're never lost, basically.
I want to talk about the specific differences between the islands. And I suppose also whether and how you saw geographies intertwine a little bit. You know, I think you have a really interesting initial chapter on Haiti and the Dominican Republic and how even if they share the same sort of landmass, the traditions are so dramatically different. But then how do you see kind of cross-contamination between the islands, and where have you seen most marked differences or similarities between the different traditions, influences, forced or not, that have come to interplay on the islands?
I think how you frame that's really good, because whilst we are mindful about just discussing the region as a whole, it also is a region that is so similar anyway, and we celebrate ourselves as a collective at the same time. So it's a very interesting duality, because it's like everybody knows their island and they celebrate that individualness, but at the same time we all are one Caribbean, which is also beautiful. So I would say that a lot of our customs and traditions are very similar, but I think what often marks the differences is language, because there are so many languages that are spoken, whether it's Haitian Creole, St. Lucian Creole, French, Spanish, and English, because that's all dependent on who colonized the regions. Then you also have the introduction of various different ethnic groups throughout the time. So whether that's the indigenous people that are already there, the African people through enslavement, the Indian communities through indentured labor following abolition. Then there was migration from Syria, Lebanese communities. So as a result of that, it just, depending on where they landed, it creates such a hybridization. And I think that's where you start to mark differences. So for example, Trinidad and Tobago has a massive Indian community, and that's why you see a lot of curry there, a lot of roti, and so on.
That was Keshia Sakarah speaking to me at Midori House. This is The Menu. Syria has traversed years of turmoil, but the recent overthrowing of the Assad regime has finally allowed many people to return, both those coming back to their home country and visitors who want to get a glimpse of what life is like in the nation nowadays. Monocle's Istanbul correspondent, Lucinda Smith, was amongst them. She was keen to witness the stories of rebuilding as well as the ones of resilience, the businesses and people that have endured through tough times. Al-Siddiq is one of them. Set in the old city of Damascus, it has been making its renowned shawarma for decades. Hannah paid a visit and she brings us this report.
In the heart of old Damascus, at lunchtime, you'll find customers queuing up at Al Sadiq for a taste of their famous shawarma. The spit-roasted meat wrapped in fresh pita bread is a staple in the Syrian capital, and it started here in 1906 when Sadiq al-Kabaz travelled to Istanbul, then capital of the Ottoman Empire, to learn how to make the dish. His great-grandson Ahmed al-Kabaz tells me the story over lunch in the restaurant's courtyard with its tinkling fountain and crowd of lunchtime diners.
Okay. He went to Turkey, first of all. His great-grandfather to learning about shawarma. Then he comes back to Damascus. But he said this meal is not Turkish. ما لها تركية. أكلة سورية.
لا تركية.
تركية.
هو تعلمها هنيك
تعلمها بتركيا. It's Turkish.
بس حاليا الأتراك بيجوا لهون بياكلوا الأكلة تبعنا مو موجودة عندهم.
But he said this meal doesn't exist in Turkey.
Yeah, I live in Turkey and this is definitely different.
صح ولا غلط؟
هو تعلمها بتركيا.
بغض النظر بسوريا.
اجى فتح هون كان أول مطعم شاورما بسوريا كلها.
إيه, he said this is the first branch for shawarma in Syria, in whole Syria.
How does it feel knowing that you're related, that you're the great-grandson of somebody who brought something so iconic to this country?
شو شعورك وقت أنت بتكون الحفيد لشخص عمل شيء مميز بالشام؟
طبعا شيء مميز جدا يعني. فخورين بالشيء اللي عمله يعني نحن هلا ماشيين على نفس الخطوة تبعه.
And they are keep going on.
Today this is one of two branches of Al Sadiq in the city, a traditional Arab-style house with a courtyard and mezzanine level. The family still own the restaurant and the recipe, and Ahmed was born in this very building.
He said they built the house before 500 years ago. This house.
On a Tuesday lunchtime, the restaurant is full of hungry Damascenes. There's no menu here. The order is always the same, a table full of mezes to start.
And and hummus.
What are these?
Burak.
Burek.
You know it?
Yeah, same. Pastry has that cheese, yeah.
Cheese inside it. And this is fatouche.
I know.
Or salad. Syrian salad.
Then the shawarma in a piping hot pile in the middle. Al Sadiq's is made only with lamb, which has to be the very freshest and cleanest, Ahmed says. And then there are the secret spices.
Here it's better because they have the secret. And it's a handmade. Everything here is handmade. By the secret keeper.
Are you going to tell me the secrets?
Of course not. Of course not.
Does anybody outside the family know the secret?
في حدا بيعرف السر غيرك؟ Only the family.
Al Sadiq stayed open throughout Syria's civil war. The economic crisis has battered the business, but tourists are slowly returning to Damascus. And Ahmed says that nothing in their shawarma has changed.
He said that's meals that we have eaten before. It's the same taste since 118th year. The same details, same taste and same details. Nothing changed.
For Monocle in Damascus, I'm Lucinda Smith.
Thanks, Hannah. This is the menu. Now it's time for the week's top food and drink headlines. Here is Monocle's Francesca Gilks.
The ice cream giant Ben & Jerry's have claimed that their parent company, Unilever, fired its CEO over the brand's recognisable left-leaning political activism. This allegation is part of a wider legal case filed by the company which alleges that Unilever violated the terms of their merger by trying to freeze the ice cream maker's social mission. Analysts have found that the average lifespan of a restaurant in China is now only 500 days. Further to this, in Beijing, where net restaurant profits fell by 88% in the first half of 2024, many eateries are only surviving around a year, with many businesses drastically lowering their prices to encourage more trade. This comes on the heel of China's announcement of a 13-point spending plan on Sunday designed to support their failing economy. The Andre Simon Award, which celebrates excellence in food and drink writing, has been awarded to a book about the history of Australian wines. The Australian Ark by Andrew Kaya chronicles the history of the nation's bottles from 1788 to the present day. Kaya spent 17 years penning the prize-winning chronicle, which he describes as like falling into a forgotten world. Those are the week's food and drink headlines. Now back to Chiara.
Thanks, Francesca. You're listening to The Menu. Finally, on today's programme, we're once again taking something of an encyclopedic approach, or rather, an alphabetical one. Author and chef Jenny Lau wanted to explore the culture and assumptions surrounding Chinese cuisine, so she penned a series of essays that she compiled in an anti-glossary of sorts. Her book, An A to Z of Chinese Food, Recipes Not Included, spans from A for authenticity to R for rice cooker and explores important ideas about how we relate to food and what it means for our identity, as well as the joys of this country's bountiful approach to cooking. Other than writing, Jenny Lau also runs multidisciplinary platform Celestial Peach and a community kitchen in East London. Monocle's Mae-Li Evans headed to meet her and find out more.
We can do without spicy. And can do a little bit spicy.
So we're in Noodle and Beer, which is a Chongqing Chinese restaurant in East London, just off Brick Lane. One of the chapters in my book is inspired by a conversation I had in this restaurant with the owner. And the chapter is D is for Dan Dan Noodles. The chapter is not really about Dan Dan Noodles at all. It's about linguistics. And it's about the meteoric rise to fame of this particular dish, Dan Dan Noodles, and why it has transcended cultures and boundaries and indeed language more than any other noodle dish that I can think of. And the key is in the name, specifically the anglicization of Dan Dan Mian, which in Chinese means bamboo pole noodle. In my chapter, I theorize that the way that the anglicized name of this dish sounds is crucial to its popularity, not just its flavor. The fact that you can say Dan Dan noodles quite easily, it has this kind of snackable sound to it, it's easy to pronounce, makes it much easier to digest on the tongue than other Chinese noodle dishes.
I think that people might read the title and until you get to the asterisk saying, recipes not included, the expectation would be this is going to be a cookbook, we're going to get a series of recipes. Why was it really important for you to not meet that expectation or to subvert it?
It was written in chronological order. And you'll probably notice a kind of vague narrative arc to it because it starts from this place of personal searching and authenticity. Big, but a good starting point. And it ends with a conclusion which lands in this place of communal identity and peace with oneself. I would say the last chapter is almost like that's my current manifesto, as it were. And so I would decide the topics each month. And if you look at the topics and how they progress from A to Z, there's almost a kind of historical through line. I think the way I approached it was to acknowledge that I would never be an expert in any of these topics. Yes, a little bit of academia and history comes in, but mainly it's about my own observations. So a lot of the chapters were inspired by a tiny observation that I'd made, such as, why is the label on this jar of sauce spelt this way when I've known the spelling to exist in other ways? Because of the way I like to investigate things, I think you can write anything about everything. And that kind of singularity or granularity is actually very, very liberating.
And you mentioned there the A is for authenticity. And I found it a really interesting chapter in that you offer some alternative words as well for what we could use instead. I wondered if you could tell me a bit about maybe why you find that term so loaded, and maybe how you hope that people might think about the food they're eating.
Authenticity is one of those words that once you think about it in the context of food, especially diaspora cooking, you will see it constantly. We have this kind of double standard when it comes to authenticity. The chapter A is for authentic. I divide people who are obsessed with authenticity into two sides of the same coin, gatekeepers and infiltrators, but essentially they're using the same benchmarks to judge a food's authenticity. So here's a little listicle that I wrote. The chef is Chinese. The chef speaks Chinese. The chef grew up eating Chinese food. The chef isn't Chinese but has a Chinese wife, has Chinese friends, worked with Chinese consultants, has a degree in Chinese, lived in China for a few years, once traveled to China, worked in a Chinese restaurant. Their food is spicy. Their food is brain-numbingly spicy. The restaurant is in Chinatown. The restaurant has rude waiting staff. The food is cooked with wok hei. It's no frills, is cheap, has off-menu items, has a secret Chinese menu. It's their mother's recipe. It's their grandmother's recipe. It's their auntie's recipe. The food tastes like home. I know both Chinese and non-Chinese people who use this as a kind of criteria for whether Chinese food is authentic or not, and that's just completely ludicrous. And what it does is box people into having to fit these expectations, whereas we never ask those questions of British food or even American food. So I've kind of moved away from authenticity. I prefer the terms such as authority. I would rather, especially as a person of colour, I would rather be hired and engaged with for my authority than for whether I'm ticking a kind of authenticity box, right?
And just even from hearing that list, something that strikes me about the book is, of course, you're dealing with very heavy subjects, but there's also a lot of humour. You've got a rousing speech from a lazy Susan. There's like a wellness newsletter that parodies a lot of stuff you might see on social media and in that world. Talk to me about the importance of bringing humour into this and why you wanted to pepper that in.
I think humour was so important when writing this book because there's this phrase, feminist killjoy, which was coined by the writer Sara Ahmed, and the same moniker applies to anyone who's trying to educate you on matters of colonialism and cultural appropriation and fetishization and misogyny. You will inevitably be labelled as that finger-waggy killjoy. And so I've always known that the way to get people on side is through humour and through subversion. And I think it's important to note that there's a difference between satire and parody, right? And I think I deploy both in the book. Satire is a form of punching up through parody. And parody is what I'd call probably like grotesque imitation or exaggeration. I use parody in several chapters. That there is, for example, a parody of a family WhatsApp group chat. And every Chinese person I know is in a million family WhatsApp chats where you're going to have the Chinese dad, in this case, who's completely unemotional, uses the wrong emojis, fairly stoic, doesn't say much. You've got the mother who's, and again, these are generalizations because it is parody. There's the mother who's fretting and fussing and mostly asking, have you eaten? What have you got there? Are you okay? Are you warm? I'm sending some soup over. The parodic element of that WhatsApp chat is that it takes place in 1881 between a young Chinese immigrant who's just gone to the west coast of America to find gold and his parents back home.
Something I noticed was the way that you call into question a lot of things that people absorb without thinking about. Why it is that when certain cuisines are featured or people are asked to talk about them, along with them come the baggage of heritage or learning to cook at home from family recipes passed down over generations. And what I found really striking with this title is the fact that it said, yes, that is some people's experiences, but there are many other ways that we engage with food, our understanding shift over time. Why was it key for you to not continue down those well-trodden paths that seems to be so dominant when it comes to the food writing industry?
I really wanted to push against all these tropes that we receive from the outside but also are complicit in perpetuating from the inside the community. I myself am an outsider in terms of the Chinese food community. I came to it much later in life. I don't come from a catering background. My mother never taught me to cook, really. My fondest memories of home cooking were meals prepared by our domestic helper, which is a very common thing in Hong Kong and in middle-class countries in Asia. So I wanted to explore and push against these stereotypes because I felt, and I still feel, that they're quite damaging. One key trope that I wanted to sort of explode or dig into, which may annoy some of the Chinese diaspora, is this idea that food is a love language. Because as language is woven into the book as a key theme, the thinking is that where actual fluency is lacking, a lot of diaspora, second, third generation Chinese lament their fluency in Chinese languages because it is very hard and because of the circumstances of being assimilated or integrated into Western society. They then turn to food and say, but food is our love language. Our parents say, I love you by handing you a plate of cut fruit. I think a lot of Asians will resonate with that. But I also think that food can be problematic. Food can be toxic. We fight over food. And especially from my experience, food can be this way to play out quite toxic communication patterns. And again, glimpses of that in some of the more parodic chapters that I write, like W is for WhatsApp or R is for rice cooker, where you've got these sort of frustrated housewives only able to communicate through food when all they really want to say is, I love you and I care for you. And why can't we learn to say, I love you to our parents? I want young diaspora Chinese to read this book and maybe rethink some of the things we choose to accept. Because I know that this is a phrase that we still repeat even amongst the young generations.
Thanks, Mae-Li. And that's all for this edition of The Menu. Remember that we are back with a new episode again on Friday at 2000 London time. That's at midday in San Francisco. Also, don't forget to tune into our spin-off show Food Neighborhoods for a tour of some of the world's tastiest destinations. I am Chiara Rimella. This program was produced by Monocle Radio and our sound engineers were Flynn Simons and Lily Austin. Thanks for listening, and until next week.